Homeless girl defends millionaire's disabled son from bullies. This headline stopped the city. While many ignored, she stood up to 4 attackers without hesitation. But what truly shocked everyone was the father's reaction, a gesture as unexpected as it was risky. And just like that, a street child became the center of a decision that divided opinions across the entire country. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The hot August afternoon weighed heavily on Fifth Avenue. New York City's stifling air seemed to compress Gregory Miller's thoughts as he walked slowly beside his son. Matthew, 7 years old with curious eyes, observed the world with an intensity that compensated for his physical limitations. The boy, who since birth had faced challenges with mobility and speech, communicated primarily through his gaze and subtle gestures that only those who loved him could interpret. Gregory, a successful real estate entrepreneur, bore the marks of someone who had forgotten how to smile. Since Marianne had left them 3 years ago, after a tumultuous divorce, he had buried himself in work and emotionally distanced himself from his son. That stroll through the cultural center was a timid attempt at reconnection, suggested by Matthew's therapist. "Want to get some ice cream before we head home?" Gregory asked, adjusting the small backpack he carried with his son's medication and essential items. Matthew nodded affirmatively, his eyes sparkling at the promise of the sweet treat. Gregory checked his watch. They still had time before the afternoon physical therapy session. They decided to cut through Central Park, a small green refuge amidst the metropolis's concrete. The park was relatively quiet for a Thursday. A few executives enjoyed their lunch break sitting on benches. Elderly couples walked leisurely along the shaded trails, and students scattered across the lawn created an almost bucolic atmosphere, if not for the skyscrapers peeking over the treetops. As they crossed a more wooded area, Matthew let out an enthusiastic sound and pointed to a squirrel leaping between branches. Gregory smiled for the first time that day. "Want to get a closer look?" he asked, and the boy nodded vigorously. Gregory was distracted for a few seconds by a call from the office, just long enough for Matthew, mesmerized by the small animal, to wander a few meters away, following the squirrel to a more secluded corner of the park. That's when everything changed. 4 teenagers, aged between 14 and 16, surrounded Matthew as soon as they noticed he was alone. The group's leader, a skinny boy with a backward baseball cap, pointed at the way the boy limped and made a comment that drew laughter from the others. "Look at that. A crippled kid. And he can't even talk right." Matthew tried to back away, but one of the boys blocked his path, pushing him lightly. "Where's your dad, kid?" "Did he abandon you because you're weird?" Fear froze Matthew in place. His eyes filled with tears as he tried to babble something incomprehensible. "What's wrong? Can't even talk like a person?" Another teenager mocked, cruelly imitating the sounds Matthew was trying to make. The boy fell to the ground when he was pushed again. His small fingers clutched the dirt as he tried to crawl backward. One of the bullies approached, clearly intending to intensify the intimidation, when something unexpected happened. "Hey, leave him alone!" A clear, firm voice cut through the air like a knife. A thin girl, approximately 10 years old, emerged from among the trees. Her dark curly hair was tied in an improvised ponytail, her worn clothes contrasting with her defiant posture. Her bare feet planted firmly on the ground between Matthew and the aggressors. "Get out of here, punk." "This isn't your problem," growled the group's leader. The girl didn't move. Her deep brown eyes quickly assessed the situation. When the first boy lunged to push her, she dodged with surprising agility, causing him to stumble from his own momentum. "You crazy girl. I'll teach you not to butt in where you're not wanted." The second teenager tried to grab her, but the girl slid under his arms and, with a swift movement, unbalanced him. There was no violence in her actions, just calculated precision, like someone who knows every inch of their body and exactly how to use it to defend themselves. Meanwhile, Gregory finally noticed his son's absence. Abruptly ending the call, he began calling for Matthew, his heart racing with each unanswered second. He ran along the park paths, dodging people and obstacles, until he finally heard sounds of commotion coming from a more secluded area. When he arrived at the scene, he was paralyzed for an instant. His son was sitting on the ground, frightened but unharmed, while a slender girl kept 4 boys much larger than her at bay. One of them, furious with the humiliation, picked up a stone from the ground. "I'll finish you, street brat." The girl, without hesitation, threw a handful of dirt into the aggressor's eyes, making him drop the stone and retreat, yelling. She took advantage of the moment of confusion to approach Matthew and extend her hand to help him up. "Are you okay? They won't hurt you anymore," she said with a surprisingly gentle voice, contrasting with the toughness she had shown seconds earlier. Matthew looked at her with absolute admiration, as if he were in front of a superhero from his favorite comic books. Gregory finally regained his senses and ran to his son, hugging him tightly. "Matthew, thank God you're okay. What happened? Who are these boys?" Before he could get answers, the teenagers, recognizing the presence of an adult, quickly dispersed, disappearing among the trees. Gregory then turned to the girl who remained there, observing the scene with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Was it you who defended my son?" he asked, still processing what he had just witnessed. The girl shrugged as if it were nothing. They were being mean to him. "I don't like bullies." It was then that Gregory noticed the details: her bare feet with evident calluses, her worn but clean clothes, her gaze that mixed childlike innocence with a wisdom no child her age should possess. "What's your name?" Gregory asked, still holding Matthew protectively close. The girl hesitated for a moment, evaluating whether she should answer. Finally, with an almost smile, she said, "Janine. My name is Janine Foster." Matthew, still trembling slightly, extended his hand to Janine in a gesture of pure gratitude that transcended words. The girl, after a moment of surprise, shook the small hand offered to her. In that instant, something invisible and powerful was established between them, as if the universe had orchestrated that encounter for some greater reason they did not yet understand. "You were very brave," Gregory said, still impressed by the agility and determination of that slender girl. "Let me thank you properly. Can we offer you some ice cream? We were going to get some before all this happened." Janine looked suspiciously at the elegant man in front of her. Her years on the streets had taught her to be cautious with strangers, especially well-dressed adults who made offers. But there was something in Matthew's smile and the sincerity in Gregory's eyes that made her hesitate. "You don't need to thank me," she replied, taking a step back. "I just did what anyone should do." It was then that Matthew, still holding his father's hand, stretched his other hand towards Janine, making sounds that clearly expressed his desire for her to accompany them. His eyes pleaded what his voice could not articulate. Janine looked at that outstretched hand, small, pale, trusting, and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the sensation of truly being seen. "All right," she finally conceded. "But just one ice cream." The three left the park and walked to a colorful ice cream parlor on the corner of Park Avenue. Matthew didn't let go of Janine's hand the entire way, as if he feared she might disappear at any moment. Gregory watched the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and growing curiosity. At the ice cream parlor, Janine ordered a simple chocolate ice cream, while Matthew enthusiastically pointed to the strawberry flavor with fruit pieces. Gregory ordered only a coffee. "Do you live nearby?" Gregory asked casually, as they sat at a corner table. Janine licked her ice cream before answering, her attentive eyes studying every detail around her. "I live in a lot of places," she answered vaguely. "Depends on the day." The answer confirmed what Gregory already suspected. Carefully not to seem intrusive, he continued, "And your family? They must be worried if you don't come back soon." A bitter smile appeared on the girl's face. "I don't have family. My grandma took care of me until I was 8, but then she got sick." Janine paused, choosing her words. "After she went to sleep forever, I was alone." Gregory noticed how she avoided using the word death, replacing it with a euphemism that sounded even sadder from a child's mouth. "And Child Protective Services?" "Social services?" he asked, unable to imagine how a child could simply disappear from the system. "I went to a shelter, but it was bad there." Her eyes hardened with the memory. "So I learned to fend for myself. I get food. I have safe places to sleep. I know how to defend myself. It's better this way." Matthew, who had been attentive to the conversation, even without being able to participate fully, extended his hand again and touched Janine's arm. There was a comprehension in his gesture that transcended the need for words. It was then that a woman of approximately 60, with grey hair and a serene expression, approached the table. She wore simple but elegant clothes and carried a small briefcase. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Gregory. "My name is Constance O'Connell. I'm a retired social worker, and I was in the park when I saw what happened. This young girl was extraordinary." Gregory stood up politely and extended his hand. "Gregory Miller, this is my son Matthew, and this is Janine, who truly saved the day." Ms. O'Connell smiled at Janine, who immediately became guarded, her posture turning defensive. "I'm not here to cause trouble, dear," the woman assured, noticing the girl's apprehension. "In fact, I spent my life helping children like you. I worked for Child Protective Services for 30 years before I retired." "I don't need help," Janine replied dryly. "I'm fine on my own." "That's visible," Ms. O'Connell agreed, surprising everyone. "You're obviously a capable and intelligent young woman, but all of us eventually need someone." Gregory, who had been observing the interaction, felt something awaken within him, an idea so sudden and intense that it almost frightened him with its clarity. "Janine," he said, leaning slightly forward, "would you like to see our house? Matthew has lots of toys and books he'd love to share with you." The girl frowned, suspicious. "Why?" "Because you helped my son when he needed it most. And because—" Gregory hesitated, surprised by his own words. "Because maybe we can help you too." Matthew, perfectly understanding what his father was proposing, began making enthusiastic sounds and animated gestures, clearly delighted with the idea. Ms. O'Connell observed the scene with growing interest. "If you'll allow me, Mr. Miller, perhaps I can assist in this situation. I know the procedures and still have contacts within the system." Janine looked from one adult to the other, and then to Matthew, who continued to smile at her. Something inside her fought against years of distrust and self-preservation. "Can I bring my doll?" she finally asked in a low voice. Gregory felt a lump in his throat. "Your doll? It's the only thing I have from my mom," Janine explained. "I never go anywhere without her." "Of course you can," Gregory replied, feeling an unexpected emotion as he realized that, behind the facade of toughness, there was just a child holding on to a last connection to the love she had once known. That same afternoon, after a call from Ms. O'Connell to former colleagues at Child Protective Services and a visit to the place where Janine kept her few belongings, an underpass beneath a bridge near the Hudson River, carefully organized with a clean piece of cardboard as a bed and a shoebox containing her precious rag doll and some clothes, they arrived at the Millers' mansion in the Upper East Side. Janine remained silent throughout the ride in Gregory's luxurious car, watching the streets of New York City gradually transform from bustling commercial areas to the tree-lined, exclusive neighborhood. When the mansion's automatic gate opened, her eyes widened momentarily before returning to the neutral expression that seemed to be her default defense. The house was imposing, with 3 stories, well-maintained gardens, and a swimming pool visible through the large living room windows. Everything screamed wealth and privilege, a world completely foreign to Janine. "Shall we go in?" Gregory invited as Rosie, the housekeeper, appeared at the door with an expression of curiosity at the sight of the unknown girl. Matthew didn't wait for answers. With rarely shown enthusiasm, he took Janine's hand and gently pulled her inside, eager to show her his world. "Slow down, Matthew," Gregory laughed, for the first time in a long while. "Let our guest breathe a little." Janine entered cautiously, her bare, dirty feet contrasting with the immaculate marble floor. She held tightly against her chest a worn rag doll, with buttons for eyes and wool hair that had seen better days. "Welcome," Gregory said, watching her absorb the environment. "For now, consider this just a visit. Nothing needs to be decided today." Ms. O'Connell, who had accompanied them, nodded approvingly. "I'll start checking the legal situation tomorrow. In the meantime, with your authorization, Mr. Miller, we can establish emergency temporary custody." While the adults discussed practical details, Matthew led Janine upstairs to his room, filled with toys, books, and technology. To both their surprise, communication between them flowed without obstacles. It was as if Matthew's speech limitations and Janine's distrust mutually cancelled each other out, creating a space where only genuine understanding existed. In his room, Matthew proudly showed off his collection of toy cars, then his tablet with educational games, and finally his favorite books. Janine touched each object with reverent care, as if she feared breaking them or being accused of theft. When they reached the bookshelf, she stopped, fascinated. Her fingers traced the colorful spines with admiration. "Do you know how to read?" she asked Matthew. The boy nodded vigorously and picked up an illustrated book about Amazon animals. He sat on the bed and patted the space beside him, inviting Janine to join him. For the first time that day, the girl truly smiled, a smile that lit up her face and revealed the child behind the survivor. She sat beside Matthew, and together they began to flip through the book, lost in a world of shared knowledge and discoveries. Downstairs, observing the scene through the half-open door, Gregory felt something awaken in his dormant heart. It was as if, suddenly, colors returned to a world that had long existed only in shades of gray. The first rays of morning sun filtered through the curtains of the guest room when Gregory gently knocked on the door. Receiving no answer, he carefully pushed it ajar, only to find the bed perfectly made and empty. A wave of panic washed over him. Janine was gone. After checking the adjacent bathroom and finding it also empty, Gregory hurried downstairs, calling for the girl. Rosie, the housekeeper, appeared at the kitchen door with a worried expression. "She left, Mr. Miller," the woman informed him. "Very early. I tried to convince her to wait for breakfast, but she said she needed to take care of some things and would be back later." "And you let her go?" Gregory questioned, incredulous. Rosie sighed. "You know I can't stop anyone by force. Besides, she seemed determined. She said she wasn't running away, she just needed to get something important." Gregory ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. Less than 24 hours after bringing Janine home, and she had already disappeared. Perhaps Ms. O'Connell was right when she mentioned that adaptation would be the biggest challenge. Children who had spent too much time on the streets developed a fierce sense of independence and distrust that wouldn't disappear overnight. Matthew appeared at the top of the stairs, still in his pajamas. Seeing his father's worried expression, he frowned and made questioning gestures. "Janine went out for a bit, son," Gregory explained, trying to sound calmer than he actually was. "She'll be back soon." Matthew's eyes filled with apprehension. He descended the stairs with difficulty, refusing his father's offered help, and went to the living room window overlooking the garden. There he stayed, staring fixedly at the gate, as if his will could make the girl reappear. Meanwhile, on the streets of New York City, Janine moved with the confidence of someone who knew every alley and shortcut. She wore new clothes that Rosie had set aside for her the night before, a simple blue t-shirt and shorts that, although too big, were held up with an improvised belt. On her feet, for the first time in a long time, she wore sneakers, uncomfortable in their newness, but practical. Her destination was an abandoned construction site near Union Square Park, where she knew she would find Tiago, a street boy a few years older than her, who had always protected her in difficult times. She needed to explain her absence and, more importantly, retrieve a small package she had entrusted to him months ago, a locket from her mother that she rarely wore for fear of losing it or having it stolen. When she arrived at the agreed spot, she found Tiago sitting on a broken ledge, eating a piece of bread. "I thought you'd been caught," he said bluntly. His eyes observed Janine's new clothes with suspicion, "or that you'd found a better life and forgotten about us." "I would never forget," Janine replied, sitting beside her friend. "I came for the locket." Tiago nodded and pulled a cord with a small golden locket from inside his shirt. "I kept it safe as I promised. But tell me, where are you staying? And what are those clothes?" Janine hesitated. She trusted Tiago, but knew he had reservations about conventional solutions, as he called any interaction with the system or traditional families. "A rich man is letting me stay at his house. His son has trouble speaking and walking, and I defended him from some bullies." Tiago frowned, immediately alert. "And what does he want in return?" "Nobody offers anything for free, Janine." "It's not like that," she protested. "He seems nice. His son likes me. And there's a retired social worker helping with the paperwork for me to stay there legally." "Paperwork?" Tiago's voice rose an octave. "You're going to become part of the system? After everything we went through in the shelters?" Janine felt guilt growing inside her, but also an unexpected irritation. "And what's the alternative, Tiago? Live under a bridge forever? At least there I have food, a real bed, and Matthew. He understands, you know. He doesn't judge me. Tiago stood up, visibly disturbed. That life isn't real, Janine. It's a golden cage. Soon they'll want to change you, make you forget who you are, where you came from. That's not true, Janine retorted, although a seed of doubt had been planted. They're not like that. Everyone is like that, Tiago insisted. Remember Camilla? That perfect family adopted her, and now she doesn't even talk to us anymore. They say she's ashamed of where she came from. Janine bit her lip, recalling her friend who had indeed disappeared after being taken in by a middle-class family. But something inside her refused to believe the same would happen to her. I'm going back, she finally said, standing up, just for now, to see what it's like. If it's bad, I still have you guys, right? Tiago stared at her for long seconds before sighing. You'll always have us, but be careful with your heart, Janine. People like us can't afford to dream. Meanwhile, at the Miller mansion, the phone rang. Gregory answered anxiously, hoping for news of Janine. Mr. Miller, this is Constance O'Connell. I've secured an emergency hearing with the family court judge for tomorrow. We need to discuss some details beforehand. Could you stop by your office this afternoon? Gregory took a deep breath, torn between worry about Janine's whereabouts and the need to resolve the legal issues to offer her a permanent home. Ms. O'Connell. Janine left this morning without saying where she was going. I'm worried. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. That's to be expected, Mr. Miller. She's lived on her own for too long to simply adapt to rules and walls overnight. If she said she'd be back, I believe she will. It's important not to greet her with reprimands when that happens. Gregory agreed, still apprehensive. They arranged to meet at 3 in the afternoon, and he hung up, turning his attention to Matthew, who remained stationed at the window. Let's have breakfast, son. Janine will be back. Matthew shook his head negatively, his eyes determined. He wouldn't leave until his new friend returned. It was almost noon when the intercom rang. Rosie answered and seconds later rushed to the living room. It's her, Mr. Miller. The girl is back. Matthew almost jumped for joy, his eyes shining. Gregory felt a relief so intense that it surprised him. In such a short time, that unknown child had become important to them. When Janine entered, she seemed a little hesitant, as if expecting to be reprimanded. To her surprise, Matthew ran to her, with his peculiar, slower, and unstable way of running, and hugged her tightly. Sorry I didn't say where I was going properly, she said to Gregory, still in Matthew's embrace. I needed to get this. She showed the golden locket, a small heart engraved with the initials MF. It was my mother's, she explained. Mary Foster. First, the only memory I have of her, besides the doll. I had left it with a friend so I wouldn't lose it. Gregory nodded, understanding the importance of that object. Next time, please let me know before you go out. We were worried. The we did not go unnoticed by Janine. It wasn't just a rule imposed by an authoritarian adult, but genuine concern. Okay, she agreed, feeling strangely comforted that there were people who would notice her absence. In the afternoon, while Matthew showed Janine his favorite TV shows in the living room, Gregory met with Ms. O'Connell in his office in the business district. The news isn't all good, the social worker informed him, placing some documents on the table. I located Janine's records in the system. She really was in 2 shelters after her grandmother's passing, but she repeatedly ran away. The last official record is from almost a year ago. And does that complicate the process? Gregory asked, concerned. It complicates and simplifies, Ms. O'Connell explained. On the one hand, there's a documented history of runaways and resistance to the system, which could raise questions about adaptability. On the other hand, there are no known relatives claiming custody, which facilitates the adoption or guardianship process. Gregory absorbed the information in silence. He never imagined he would be considering adoption, not after the painful separation from Marianne, which had left him with deep fears of new emotional bonds. But something about Janine, in the way she and Matthew had instantly connected, stirred an inexplicable certainty within him. There's one more thing, Ms. O'Connell continued, her tone growing more serious. Richard Allen, your corporate lawyer, contacted me this morning. He's concerned about your intentions. Gregory frowned. What do you mean? He suggested that taking in a street girl could generate harmful speculation about your image and the company. He mentioned something about your ex-wife potentially using this against you in future disputes. A cold anger ran through Gregory. Richard, though competent, had always been calculating and overly concerned with appearances. "Richard doesn't understand what's happening here," he finally said. "This isn't about image or strategy. It's about doing what's right." Miss O'Connell smiled, seemingly relieved by the answer. "That's what I thought. But it's important for you to know that there will be resistance, Mr. Miller, both within your circle and in the system. We need to be prepared." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Rosie had prepared lunch and watched with a discreet smile as Janine helped Matthew cut his meat into small pieces, with a delicacy that contrasted with her apparent toughness. "You're good with him," the housekeeper commented. "You have patience." Janine shrugged, but a slight blush of pride colored her cheeks. "He's nice. He doesn't treat me like I'm weird." Rosie nodded, understanding the layers of that simple comment. In her work with the Miller family, she had witnessed how Matthew was often treated with condescension or discomfort by visitors, and even some family members who didn't know how to deal with his limitations. "You're alike," Rosie observed. "Not on the outside, of course, but on the inside. You both know difficult things, don't you?" 3 weeks had passed since Janine entered the Millers' lives. The hearing with the family court judge resulted in a 6-month temporary guardianship for Gregory, a period during which social workers would make periodic visits to assess the girl's adaptation. One Saturday morning, Gregory watched from his office window as Janine and Matthew played in the garden. It was surprising how, in such a short time, the girl had found her place in that house. The first days were marked by hesitation. Janine would wake before dawn, keep her few belongings always organized, as if she needed to leave in a hurry, and sometimes disappear for a few hours, always returning before nightfall, often with small treasures, a colorful feather, an interesting stone, or simply stories about the friends she had visited on the streets. Gradually, however, her outings became less frequent. The unmade bed in the morning indicated that she was starting to sleep more deeply, without the constant state of alertness that street life demanded. Small changes in her behavior signaled progressive adaptation. She had accepted Rosie washing and mending her precious doll, allowed Gregory to buy her new clothes, though she insisted on choosing simple and practical items, and recently, for the first time, referred to the guest room as my room. But most notable was her relationship with Matthew. The boy, who had always been withdrawn with strangers due to his speech limitations, blossomed in Janine's presence. She had developed her own system of communication with him, a mixture of gestures, facial expressions, and keywords that worked with surprising effectiveness. Matthew laughed more, tried to speak more often, and even his therapists commented on his recent progress. The phone rang, interrupting Gregory's reflections. "Miller, we need to talk," Richard Allen's voice. His lawyer sounded tense. "I've received some troubling calls from shareholders. The rumors about your domestic situation are spreading." Gregory sighed. Despite his efforts to keep the situation discreet, New York City was a place where secrets rarely remained buried for long, especially when they involved prominent figures in the business world. "What kind of rumors?" "They say you've brought a street girl to live with you and your son. Some speculate about your motivations. Others question your emotional stability since the divorce. Marianne has contacted the office demanding information." The mention of his ex-wife made Gregory grip the phone tighter. Marianne had made it clear during the divorce that she wasn't prepared for the responsibilities of a child with special needs, preferring to rebuild her life in London with a French architect. Visits to Matthew were rare and brief. Why would she be interested now? "My personal life is not a matter for shareholders, Richard, and it's certainly none of Marianne's business. When it affects stock value, it becomes a matter for shareholders," Richard retorted. "And when it involves your son, it potentially becomes Marianne's business." She mentioned something about stable family environment. Gregory felt his blood run cold. Was Marianne hinting at a custody battle for Matthew after years of estrangement? "Richard, we've arranged everything according to the law. I have Janine's temporary guardianship, granted by the judge. Ms. O'Connell is supervising the process. There's nothing irregular or concerning. The courts can interpret the situation differently, Gregory. A street child with a history of runaways and unstable behavior? Under the same roof as your vulnerable son? Marianne could argue that you're exposing Matthew to unnecessary risks. That's ridiculous. Janine has been wonderful with Matthew, They have a special connection. Feelings don't matter in court, Gregory. Facts matter, and the fact is you made an impulsive decision that could have serious ramifications. I suggest you reconsider before this becomes a nasty legal battle. After hanging up the phone, Gregory remained motionless for long minutes, absorbing the impact of those words. Through the window, he saw Janine pushing Matthew on the adapted swing they had recently installed. The boys' laughter echoed through the garden, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller." Rosie's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Ms. O'Connell has arrived for her scheduled visit." Constance O'Connell entered the office, carrying her inseparable briefcase. Recently, she had become a constant presence in the house, not only as an official supervisor, but also as a mentor for Janine and an advisor for Gregory. "Good news," she announced after initial greetings. "I spoke with Judge Campbell yesterday. She's impressed with the progress reports and mentioned the possibility of expediting the decision on permanent guardianship." Gregory felt a momentary relief, soon replaced by the shadow of the previous conversation. "Marianne has contacted my lawyer. It seems she's questioning my parental decisions." Constance's expression became serious. "That complicates things. What was her level of involvement with Matthew in recent years?" "Minimal. 2 visits a year at most, a few calls on birthdays and holidays. She built a new life in London and made it clear she didn't want the responsibility of a child with special needs. That will work in our favor, but we need to be cautious. Custody disputes can be unpredictable. How is Janine adapting?" Gregory reported on the progress, highlighting the special connection between the children and Janine's increasingly stable behavior. "There are still challenges," he added honestly. "She has frequent nightmares. Sometimes she wakes up screaming names we don't recognize, and she still keeps in touch with other street kids, especially one named Tiago, for whom she seems to have great regard." Constance nodded, making notes. "All of this is expected. Trauma doesn't resolve overnight. The important thing is that she's developing trust and putting down roots here." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Janine entered, holding Matthew's hand. Both were flushed from playing in the garden. "Miss O'Connell!" Janine exclaimed, a smile lighting up her face. The girl who had initially shown such distrust of the social worker now greeted her with genuine enthusiasm. "Did you bring that book you promised?" Constance smiled, pulling a colorful volume about Brazilian women who made history from her bag. "As I promised, but first I need to talk with both of you for a bit." Janine immediately became serious, her posture subtly shifting to a defensive attitude that emerged whenever she felt she was being evaluated. Matthew, sensing the tension, squeezed her hand in silent support. "It's nothing to worry about," Constance reassured them. "I just want to know how you're feeling. Janine, are you enjoying living here?" The girl hesitated, choosing her words carefully, a habit acquired during years of interrogations by various authorities. "I like it," she finally replied. "It's different, but a good different. Matthew is my real friend, and Mr. Miller doesn't yell or drink like the other adults I've known. Rosie makes good food. My room has a big window where I can see the stars. And school. Are you adapting well?" This question generated a more complex reaction. After weeks of preparation, including private tutoring to bring her knowledge up to par, Janine had started attending the same private school as Matthew, an institution that prided itself on its inclusive approach. "It's hard sometimes," she admitted. "There's a lot I don't know, and some girls stare at my clothes even though they're the same uniforms. But Miss Beatrice is nice. She said she likes the way I tell stories." Matthew made some animated gestures, which Janine immediately translated. "He's saying I defended Louisa when some boys were bothering her about her hearing aid." Gregory and Constance exchanged glances. It was the first time they had heard about this incident. "You defended a classmate?" Constance asked. Janine shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "They were being mean. I just told them that if they kept it up, they'd regret it. Nobody messes with my friends." "And how did you feel doing that?" Constance continued, carefully observing the girls' reactions. "Strong," Janine replied after a moment of thought. "Like when I defended Matthew that day in the park. But different too, because now I have a place to come back to." The simplicity and depth of that answer moved Gregory. A place to come back to. That was exactly what he wanted to provide. Not just a house, but a home. A point of security and belonging in the world. Later, after Aitum, Constance had left, Gregory found Janine alone on the porch watching the sunset. Matthew had already retired for his afternoon rest, part of his therapy routine. "May I sit?" he asked. Janine nodded, moving slightly to make space. "I wanted to thank you," Gregory said after a few moments of shared silence. The girl looked at him, confused. For what? For defending that girl at school, for being a good friend to Matthew, for bringing new life into this house. Janine lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the compliment. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," Gregory gently insisted. "Before you came, Matthew and we survived. Now we're living again." A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the sky undergo its twilight transformations. "There's something I wanted to tell you," Gregory finally continued. "There might be some complications. Matthew's mother found out you're living with us and she's not very happy." Janine immediately tensed. "Does she want me to leave?" "I don't know exactly what she wants, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will fight for you to stay here. This is your home now if you want it to be." Janine's eyes, usually so hard and determined, welled up slightly. "I want to," she whispered. But? What if I'm not good enough? What if I do something wrong? People always expect me to mess everything up." Gregory felt a sharp pain as he realized the deep insecurities that child carried, traces of a life marked by abandonment and negative expectations. "Janine, look at me," he asked softly. "No one is perfect. I make mistakes every day. The important thing isn't never to make mistakes. It's to learn, to try again, to move forward together." The girl stared at him, searching for sincerity in his words. What she found seemed to reassure her, at least temporarily. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a moment. "Of course." "Why are you doing all this? Why did you bring me to your house? There are a lot of kids on the street." "Why me?" It was a question Gregory expected, but for which he had no simple or single answer. How to explain that inexplicable certainty he had felt from the very first moment? "When I saw you defending Matthew that day," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I didn't just see courage. I saw kindness, I saw strength, I saw someone who cared when they didn't have to. And then when I saw you and Matthew together, it was as if a missing piece finally found its place. I can't explain it better than that." Janine absorbed those words in silence, processing them in her own way. "Thank you," she said simply. Then, with a small smile, "Can I call Matthew my brother? That's how I think of him." Gregory smiled, feeling a wave of affection and gratitude. I'm sure he'd love that. The sun finished setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. A new phase was beginning for all of them. 4 months passed, and New York City's autumn painted the neighborhood trees with shades of yellow and red. In the Millers' spacious living room, Janine sat at the piano, her fingers moving hesitantly over the keys as she followed the instructions of the private teacher Gregory had hired. "Very good, Janine," exclaimed Miss Victoria, a 70-year-old woman with kind eyes and infinite patience. "You have a natural talent for music. In just 2 weeks, you can already play this melody." Janine blushed at the compliment, still uncomfortable receiving them. "It's just because Matthew helps me by practicing with me." Across the room, Matthew smiled at hearing his name. Although he couldn't play the piano due to his limited motor coordination, he had developed a deep interest in music and spent hours listening to Janine practice, offering silent encouragement. The discovery of Janine's musical talent happened by chance. During a visit to Ms. O'Connell's house, the girl became fascinated by the social worker's antique piano. By randomly striking some keys, she demonstrated an innate sensitivity for melodies that impressed everyone. Gregory didn't hesitate to provide her with lessons, seeing how music offered Janine a new channel of expression. "I'm proud of both of you," Ms. Victoria said, including Matthew in her praise. "Music is a universal language, and you are learning to speak it together." After the lesson, as the teacher said goodbye, Gregory entered the room carrying several bags. "Shopping for the project?" Janine asked, curious. Gregory nodded, placing the bags on the table. "Craft materials, as you suggested. I thought the easiest children could make bracelets and necklaces while we talk with them." In recent weeks, a new routine had been established in the Millers' lives. On Saturdays, they dedicated themselves to a social project initiated by Gregory, inspired by his experience with Janine. Once a week, they visited different areas of the city, distributing food, clothes, and, more importantly, attention to vulnerable children. The idea arose during a dinner conversation when Janine expressed concern for her former street companions, especially with the arrival of winter. Gregory, touched by the girl's empathy, suggested they do something about it, not just with donations, but with constant presence and structured support. "I've already confirmed with Tiago," Janine commented, referring to the friend who had initially distrusted her new life. "He's going to help gather the children from the Union Square Park area tomorrow." Janine's relationship with Tiago had gradually transformed. After several tense conversations and some supervised visits, the older boy had begun to accept that his friend was truly happy in her new home. Eventually, he became a valuable collaborator in the project, serving as a bridge between Gregory's structured world and the raw reality of the streets. "Great," Gregory approved. "Rosie prepared sandwiches and hot chocolate for us to take. Oh, and before I forget, I received a call from the school today." Janine immediately became alert. Despite her remarkable academic progress, school adaptation still presented occasional challenges. "Did I do something wrong?" Gregory smiled, reassuring her. "On the contrary, Ms. Beatrice called to say that your essay for the literary project was selected to represent the school in a statewide competition." Janine's eyes widened. "Really? But I just told the story of how we met, with a few different details. And you told it in a way that touched people, Janine." The teacher said she'd never seen such an honest and moving essay from someone so young. Matthew approached, making animated gestures that Janine and Gregory now interpreted fluently. "He's saying he knew you would win," Gregory translated, "because you tell the best stories." A shy smile illuminated Janine's face. In recent months, she had blossomed in ways no one could have predicted. The new clothes no longer seemed out of place on her, and her hair, now longer and well cared for, was often braided by Rosie, who had found in the girl a daughter she had never had. More importantly, there was a light in her eyes that had replaced the defensive hardness of the early days. School, initially an intimidating terrain, had become a space for discoveries. With intensive support to overcome educational gaps, Janine quickly reached and, in some subjects, surpassed the level expected for her age. Literature and arts proved to be her passions, channels to express experiences that everyday words could not capture. "I'll show Tiago tomorrow," she said, referring to the news about the competition. "He always said I should write a book about our adventures." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. Rosie answered and, seconds later, appeared at the living room door with an apprehensive expression. "Mr. Gregory, it's Dr. Richard. He says it's urgent." Gregory frowned. Richard's calls rarely brought good news lately. "I'll take it in the office. Children, why don't you help Rosie organize the materials for tomorrow?" In the office, Gregory closed the door before answering. "Richard, what happened?" "We received a notification from Marianne's lawyer," Richard informed him bluntly. "She is officially contesting Matthew's custody and requesting a judicial review." Gregory felt his blood run cold in his veins. On what grounds? She practically abandoned her son in recent years. She's alleging that Janine's presence creates an unstable and potentially dangerous environment for Matthew, citing her history on the streets and school incidents. Incidents? What incidents? Apparently there was a situation a few weeks ago where Janine physically confronted a classmate who was mocking Matthew. Gregory clenched his fists. The physical confrontation was, in fact, Janine placing herself between Matthew and an older boy who was cruelly imitating his difficult speech. There had been no violence, just the same protective determination she had shown from day one. "This is ridiculous, Richard. Janine protects Matthew. They have a special connection. Even the therapists comment on how much he has progressed since she arrived. I understand, Gregory, but courts can interpret things differently. Marianne is painting a picture of you as an emotionally unstable father since the divorce, who brought a problematic child home without considering the impacts on your vulnerable son. Gregory took a deep breath, controlling his rising anger. When did she care so much about Matthew? How many therapy sessions did she attend in recent years? How many nights did she stay awake when he was sick? Feelings don't win court cases, Gregory. Facts and perceptions do. And the perception Marianne is building is dangerous. Furthermore, Richard hesitated. Furthermore, what? She's mentioning financial resources, hinting that, with her family's fortune in France, she could provide Matthew with specialists and treatments that would revolutionize his condition. Gregory felt his stomach drop. Money had always been a weapon in Marianne's family, heirs to a French wine empire that dated back generations. What do we do now? He asked, his voice betraying his exhaustion. We start gathering evidence. Medical reports showing Matthew's progress. Statements from therapists. Janine's school evaluations. We need to build a solid case showing that both children are thriving together. After hanging up, Gregory remained motionless for long minutes, absorbing the impact of that news. The soft sound of the piano began to flow through the house again, Janine practicing the piece she had learned. The simple but profound melody seemed to perfectly reflect the moment, beautiful and hopeful, yet tinged with melancholy. When he finally returned to the living room, he found a scene that tugged at his heart. Janine at the piano, Matthew beside her, both completely absorbed in the music. The evening light filtered through the windows, creating a picture that seemed to have come from a dream he didn't even know he had. "Dad," Matthew exclaimed upon seeing him, one of the few words he could pronounce clearly. Recently, he had started calling Gregory this more frequently, as if Janine's presence had also strengthened other family bonds. "Is everything okay?" Janine asked, always attentive to subtle changes in mood. "You seem worried." Gregory forced a smile. "Just boring work matters. How about we order pizza for dinner tonight?" Later, after the children had gone to bed, Gregory called Miss O'Connell. The social worker listened attentively about Marianne's legal action. "I'm not surprised," she commented after a sigh. "Unfortunately, I've seen similar situations. When a child begins to make remarkable progress, distant relatives often reappear, especially when money is involved. What worries me is how this will affect Janine. She's finally feeling secure, belonging somewhere. And now we need to be honest with her," Constance finished firmly. "Janine has survived far more than most adults could endure. She deserves to know what's happening and to be part of the process." The next morning, before the scheduled visit to the city center for the social project, Gregory gathered the children in the living room. With carefully chosen words, he explained about Marianne's legal action, avoiding vilifying Matthew's mother, but being honest about the challenges they would face. Matthew reacted with silent tears, clinging to Janine's hand as if he feared being separated from her at any moment. Janine, for her part, remained strangely calm, a calm Gregory recognized from their first days together, when she used impassivity as a shield. "She can't take him away," she finally said, her voice low but resolute. "She doesn't even know his language. She doesn't even know how he takes his medicine. She doesn't even—" Her voice faltered. And for the first time since arriving at that house, Janine allowed herself to cry openly, not tears of pain or fear, but of deep indignation at the injustice that threatened to separate a family that, against all odds, had found its way to happiness. "We won't give up without a fight," Gregory promised, hugging both children. "We're a family now, and families stick together." Later, during the visit to the center, while distributing food and craft materials to children living on the streets, Gregory observed how Janine interacted with them, with respect, empathy, and an understanding that no social worker, however well-intentioned, could replicate. She knew their realities because she had lived the same struggles. She spoke their language because it had been her language too. It was at that moment, seeing her teach a younger girl how to make a colorful bracelet while telling stories that brought smiles to faces, usually distrustful, that Gregory had an epiphany. Janine was not just a child they had helped. She was a bridge between worlds, a translator between realities that rarely communicated effectively. And perhaps, he thought as he watched Matthew distribute drawings he had made, especially for each child. This bridge was exactly what everyone needed. Not just his small family, but an entire society that often chose not to see those living on the margins. Mr. Miller. Tiago's voice, Janine's friend, interrupted his thoughts. The teenager, who had initially treated him with hostile suspicion, now showed cautious respect. There's a child over there who doesn't want to come closer. Janine said you might be able to help. Gregory followed Tiago to a secluded corner of the park, where a small figure was partially hidden behind a tree. It was a boy of approximately 6 years old, with large, frightened eyes that watched the movement with absolute distrust. That's Luke, Tiago explained in a low voice. He just arrived on the streets recently. Doesn't talk much. Janine said he reminds her of herself before. Gregory felt a pang in his chest observing the boy, so small to carry the weight of the world alone. Carefully he approached and crouched at a respectful distance. "Hello, Luke," he said softly. "My name is Gregory. Would you like some hot chocolate?" "It's getting cold today." The boy didn't answer, but his eyes fixed on the steaming mug Gregory offered. After long seconds of hesitation, he took a step forward and accepted the drink with trembling hands. In that instant, looking at that child who reminded him of Janine before, Gregory knew that, regardless of the outcome of the legal battle with Marianne, the work they had started together, the work of building bridges and extending hands to those left behind, would continue. The Manhattan Civil Court commanded respect with its monumental architecture. Inside one of the courtrooms, Gregory awaited with controlled anxiety, wearing his best suit and trying to convey an image of stability and competence. Beside him, Dr. Martin, the new family law attorney who had replaced Richard, meticulously organized documents. Across the room, Marianne maintained her elegant posture, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing an imported ensemble that screamed European sophistication. Beside her, a severe-looking lawyer repeatedly checked his watch. "Remember," Dr. Martin whispered, "stay calm no matter what is said. Our case is solid. We have 6 months of positive reports, expert testimonies, and documented progress from both children." Gregory nodded, but his mind was on the children waiting at home. That morning, Matthew had refused to eat breakfast, his eyes anxiously following every movement of his father as he prepared to leave. Janine, for her part, had maintained an almost frightening calm, helping Matthew with his morning tasks and ensuring he took his medication. "It's going to be all right," she had said before Gregory left, with a maturity that sometimes startled him. "We'll stay together no matter what happens." The door opened, interrupting his thoughts. Judge Helen Campbell, known for her impartiality and commitment to child welfare, entered the room. Everyone stood in respect. "We may begin," she announced after settling in. "We are here to evaluate Ms. Marianne Miller's petition requesting a review of Matthew Miller's custody, currently under the full custody of his father, Gregory Miller. We will also consider the situation of Janine Foster, who is under temporary guardianship of Mr. Miller." The next 2 hours were intense. Marianne's lawyer painted a picture of Gregory as an emotionally unstable father who had made impulsive decisions after the divorce, endangering the well-being of his vulnerable son by bringing home a girl with a problematic history and aggressive tendencies. "My client can offer Matthew a structured environment in London, with access to the best specialists in child development and far from potentially harmful influences," the lawyer argued, casting a significant glance at the folder containing information about Janine. When it was his turn, Dr. Martin methodically presented the evidence they had gathered. Matthew's progress reports showing significant improvements in communication and sociability since Janine's arrival. School evaluations demonstrating the positive adaptation of both children. Testimonies from therapists attesting to the healthy bond that had formed between them. To separate these children now, the lawyer concluded, would be to cause unnecessary trauma to both, reversing months of progress and undermining the trust they have built in the family system. The judge listened attentively, making occasional notes. When the lawyers finished, she turned to Gregory. "Mr. Miller, I would like to hear directly from you. What motivated you to take responsibility for Janine, considering the challenges already present with your son?" Gregory took a deep breath. This was the question he had prepared for, but no rehearsal could fully capture what he felt. "Your Honor, when Janine appeared in our lives, She didn't just save Matthew from aggressors in the park. She saved us from something worse. A joyless existence where we survived without truly living. I was a father who loved his son, but didn't know how to connect with him. Matthew was a brilliant child trapped by limitations that the world insisted on defining as all he was. Gregory paused, organizing his thoughts. Janine taught us something we had forgotten, how to be a family. She and Matthew developed a language of their own that goes beyond words. They protect each other, support each other, challenge each other to grow. As for me, she showed me that being a father isn't just about physical care or providing material comfort. It's about being present, adapting, growing together. The judge nodded, then turned to Marianne. Ms. Miller, according to records, your visits to Matthew over the past 3 years have been sporadic. What has changed now that you wish to assume full custody? Marianne adjusted in her chair, visibly uncomfortable with the direct question. Your Honor, I have always loved my son. The divorce was a traumatic period, and I admit I needed time to reorganize my life. Now I am stable in a new marriage with resources to offer Matthew everything he needs. And what about Janine? The judge asked. How do you intend to deal with the bond that, according to all reports, has developed between the children? With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe Matthew needs stability and specialized attention, not a playmate with a problematic history, Marianne replied, her voice betraying slight disdain. Surely there are more suitable families for Janine, with experience in dealing with children of her profile. The coldness of that response caused a heavy silence in the room. Gregory felt a dull anger rise, but he remained outwardly composed as his lawyer had advised. I understand, the judge said. I would now like to speak with the children. Were they brought today as requested? Gregory nodded. They are in the special waiting room, accompanied by social worker Constance O'Connell as you instructed. Excellent. We will take a 30-minute break while I speak with them in my chambers. While they waited, Gregory observed Marianne across the room, exchanging messages on her cell phone, seemingly unconcerned. How could they have been married for 8 years? How could they have built a life together, planned a future, brought Matthew into the world? Now they seemed like inhabitants of different planets, with values and priorities incomprehensible to each other. When the hearing resumed, the judge returned with a thoughtful expression. After considering all arguments, evidence, and my conversation with the children, I am ready to issue my decision, she announced. Cases like this are always complex, as they involve not only legal aspects but deep emotional bonds and the well-being of vulnerable children. Gregory felt his heart race, his hands unconsciously gripping the arms of the chair. Considering first the situation of Matthew Miller, the petition for custody review presented by Ms. Marianne Miller is denied. Full custody will remain with Mr. Gregory Miller, with visitation rights for the mother to be agreed upon between the parties. A sigh of relief escaped Gregory's lips. On the other side, Marianne paled. As for the minor Janine Foster, the judge continued, I authorize the conversion of temporary guardianship into full adoption by Mr. Gregory Miller, conditioned on biannual follow-up visits by social services for a period of 1 year. Gregory felt tears forming, but held them back. Adoption, the legal and permanent recognition that Janine was now officially part of his family. Your Honor, Marianne's lawyer protested, my client would like to appeal this decision and... No, Marianne surprisingly interrupted, placing her hand on her lawyer's arm. Her face had softened, and for a moment Gregory glimpsed the woman he had known years ago. We will not appeal. She stood up and, to everyone's surprise, approached Gregory. I heard what they said, she spoke in a low voice. When the judge interviewed them, I heard through the door. Matthew, he spoke for her. He defended her with words, Gregory. Clear, strong words. Gregory stared at her, astonished. Matthew, whose speech limitations had always been one of his greatest challenges, had found his voice to defend his sister. I won't interfere anymore, Marianne continued, her eyes moist. But I would like, if possible, to get to know them better. Both of them. Perhaps during my visits to the States. Gregory nodded, unable to verbalize a response to that unexpected change. Marianne briefly squeezed his arm and moved away, leaving the room with determined steps, leaving her perplexed lawyer behind. When he finally received authorization to see the children, Gregory found them in the special waiting room, sitting side by side on a colorful sofa. Janine was reading a book aloud to Matthew, who watched her with absolute admiration. "Children?" he called softly. Both looked up simultaneously, and the synchronicity of that simple movement perfectly encapsulated the bond they had formed. Two hearts beating to the same rhythm, two souls that recognized each other. "Did we win?" Janine asked, her voice mixing hope and caution. Gregory felt a smile spread across his face. "Yes, we won." "You two, the three of us, are officially a family now, forever." Matthew was the first to react, getting up from the sofa and practically throwing himself into his father's arms, sobbing with joy. Janine remained seated for a moment, as if processing the information, the impact of finally belonging legally and permanently to someone. "Forever?" she asked in a whisper, her voice betraying a vulnerability rarely shown. "Even when I make mistakes? Even when it's hard?" Gregory extended his free arm, inviting her into the family hug. "Especially when it's hard. That's what families do. They stick together through everything." Janine finally joined the embrace, and the three stayed like that for long moments, forming a perfect circle of belonging. 2 weeks later, on a sunny Saturday morning, the Miller family, now officially Gregory, Matthew, and Janine Foster Miller, gathered for another visit from the social project they had created together. This time they were back at Union Square Park, where they knew they would find Luke, the shy boy they had met previously. "There he is," Janine pointed, spotting the small figure partially hidden behind a tree. In recent weeks, they had established a tenuous bond with the boy, who accepted food and occasionally some toys, but remained distant and cautious. Matthew, carrying a toy car he had chosen especially for Luke, advanced determinedly towards him. To everyone's surprise, the boy did not recoil this time. Instead, he took a few hesitant steps forward, his eyes fixed on the toy. "It's for you," Janine said gently, also approaching. "Matthew chose it. Kurt's his favorite, but he wants you to have it." Luke accepted the toy car with trembling hands, his fingers exploring the wheels with silent fascination. When he finally looked up, there was something in his eyes, a minimal spark of trust, a tiny relaxation of the defenses raised so early in life. I have a dog," he said suddenly, his voice so low it was almost inaudible. "His name is Popcorn. He's small and white. He's hiding over there." Luke pointed to a gap between two buildings where, presumably, he had established his temporary shelter. Those few words, the first he had addressed directly to them, represented a monumental act of trust. Janine looked at Gregory, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Luke," Janine said, crouching down to the boy's height, "would you and Popcorn like to see our house? It has a big garden where he could run, and we have hot chocolate." The boy frowned, suspicious. "Just to visit?" "To start," Gregory replied, joining the conversation with the gentleness that had become his hallmark since the transformation initiated with Janine's arrival. "Then we can talk about what would be best for you and Popcorn." No pressure. Luke considered the offer for long moments, his gaze alternating between Janine, Matthew, and Gregory, as if trying to decipher their true intentions. Finally, with the wisdom that only children forced to grow up too fast possess, he made his decision. "I'll go get Popcorn," he said, his voice small but determined. As Luke momentarily disappeared into the alley to retrieve his dog, Gregory felt a wave of emotion watching his children, Matthew, whose eyes shone with the joy of making a new friend, and Janine, whose transformation from a distrustful girl to a secure and compassionate young woman was almost miraculous. "It's like a circle, isn't it?" he commented softly. Janine looked at him, curious. "How so?" "It started with you protecting Matthew in the park. Now together, we are extending that protection to others." Janine reflected on this, a slow smile illuminating her face. "It's like Miss Beatrice says in literature class, every act of kindness creates ripples that go far beyond what we can see." Luke returned, carrying a scrawny white puppy that trembled in his arms. Beside him walked Tiago, Janine's old street friend, now a constant collaborator on the project and slowly building his own way out of the streets through the education Gregory had helped him resume. Observing that small congregation, so improbable, So diverse, so united by invisible bonds of mutual understanding, Gregory felt a deep certainty. The impulsive gesture of bringing Janine home that fateful afternoon was not just about saving a child from the streets. It was about rediscovering the true meaning of family. Not one defined by blood or documents, but by hearts that choose to beat together, by hands that reach out to each other in moments of greatest need. As they walked back to the car, Luke timidly holding Janine's hand, Matthew conversing animatedly with his expressive gestures, and Popcorn comfortably nestled in Gregory's arms, he knew his life would never be the same. And that, he realized with quiet gratitude, was the greatest blessing he could have received. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Janine, Matthew, and Gregory's journey has touched your hearts. This story reminds us that families are not defined only by blood ties, but by the invisible bonds of love and understanding that we choose to create every day. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about human connections that transcend barriers. Find it here by clicking on your left. If this narrative about courage, acceptance, and second chances resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Your comments are valuable to us. Tell us which moment of the story touched your heart the most, or if you have witnessed an act of kindness that transformed lives around you. Every day we share unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Join us on this journey of emotions and reflections. Until the next story.